I don't continue to dialogue, get support or whatever, it's very easy for me to slip back into disordered eating behavior because it's a coping mechanism that worked for me,
Yeah.
in terms of that sort of way for a long time. So I'm very open about that. And so, I've had the experience where I went for some time, I did, and there were foods that didn't agree with me. And so having that conversation with patients is interesting because, there are general guidelines, there are general principles. Pretty much everybody, I think, knows what they should do within variation, right? Like people are generally pretty good at determining what's healthy and what's not healthy, but what is the balance for individuals? And this idea that food freedom, I think it's really kind of, if I can say, bastardized on social media and other things in a sense where, you could eat whatever you wanted, but there's a consequence to that, to some of those things. And we don't live in an environment where the food around us is health promoting.
Welcome to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast, where we empower women with the latest insights and advice on holistic health. From cutting-edge medical research to practical wellness tips, our mission is to help you thrive at every stage of life. Join us as we explore topics ranging from hormonal balance and reproductive health to nutrition and mental well-being. Whether you're seeking solutions for a specific health concern or simply want to enhance your overall wellness, you're in the right place. Let's embark on this journey to better health together. This is the Advanced Women's Health Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I am so excited to chat with Dr. Tracy-Lynn in our Sudbury clinic, one of our northern docs up there who's very brave in the snow. I will call her TLR at multiple points throughout the conversation. The reason why is because when I was doing research way back in the day, I studied toll-like receptors. TLR. And so the first time I met you, it just stuck. I was like, oh, it's TLR. So we have known each other for a very, very long time, it feels like. And it's about time she joined Advanced Women's Health. We've been talking about it for years. So I would love for you to intro yourself and just give us a bit of a rundown about what got you into naturopathic medicine.
All right. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here and so pleased to finally be a part of the amazing team at Advanced Women's Health. So I have been practicing in different capacities as an ND since 2012. So my original career was in genetics, and I did a lot of stakeholder engagement work, course development work with Agriculture Canada. That was my first career. So it was interesting. I got to travel all over Canada. I developed courses, do speaking. I got to travel and live in Vietnam for a while, Macedonia, some other places. So I had an interesting kind of experience in my 20s. But during that time, I was recovering from an eating disorder. And as a result of that, I've been diagnosed with peptic ulcer disease. And I was about 26 at the time. And I was told that I would need to take some medication and that I had high risk of stomach cancer. And it was sort of presented to me, at least my recollection of this was very much like, you need to take these pills for the rest of your life or you're going to get cancer when you're 40. That was the impression that I was left with. And of course, that was scary and didn't seem to make sense. And I knew enough about genetics and physiology. I had been pre-med and gone back and forth. And I was actually in the process of, I had rewritten my MCATs and I was doing some applications to some medical schools at the time. And I had been seeing a chiropractor because I had been in an accident. So there's another story. And she said, you need to see this ND. Never had heard of it, or anything like that. And I said, okay, well, I'll do anything. I was in a lot of pain. I had, I think, 6 ulcers they had seen on a scope. Like, it was bad. And esophagitis and other things. So, and, it was, as many of us has had this experience, you go into an ND, you fill out these 20 pages of intake forms and, tell them.
People love to hate our intakes.
I know. They're so important.
Yeah.
And, I walked out of that 90-minute visit with a full new understanding of my body and I was hooked. I thought, and I hadn't even we hadn't even had any successes or anything yet. But I'm very pleased to say that I went back 6 months later and had a clear scope, which I think is pretty impressive. I did the work. The road wasn't easy. But yeah, and so from that point forward, there was no other path for me. Kind of abandoned the medical school application route and applied to CCNM. I mean, this was in early 2008, and I started in September 2008. So I was, and I'll be really honest with you, I didn't do a very good job at looking into what does it mean to be an ND and how do you run a business. I just loved the way that the difference in philosophy that I was approached with just instantly clicked with me. And it was all, and so that was it there. So yeah, so I started at CCNM in 2008. And I kind of did it in a bit of an interesting way because I actually had both of my oldest children during the program, which I always tell students that we work with. I'm like, I don't recommend that. But it was the way it was.
Very intense program.
Yes, it's
let
an
alone
intense
being
program
pregnant with small kids.
Yeah, but I made it. I don't think my adrenals ever recovered. But yeah, so thank goodness for the support NDs at the school. And it took me, I think I officially graduated in 2013, but worked at the clinic there for a while. And then I went out to the Ottawa Valley and I worked in the Ottawa Valley for 4 or 5 years. I had an interesting health journey with my daughter, which was interesting to navigate the other side of the healthcare system once I was in it. And so we were in Trenton for a while, but we've been in North Bay now for just outside of North Bay for about 6 years and during COVID and that. And so I started seeing patients more regularly, thankfully, but I also work with our professional association. So sorry, I'm at Sarah, doing education, regulatory affairs, and that kind of thing. So I get to do a little bit of both and see some different aspects of the profession and regulation. And that's been interesting. So
very cool. So coming back into practice, what were you most excited to come back and treat? Like, what were the components that you just could not wait to get your hands back into?
Honestly, it's really that interaction with the patient. I think right away, there was some kind of maybe some nervousness. I wasn't totally out of it, but to kind of get back on the horse, so to speak. But right away, even in the first few visits, that face that a patient will make when you've explained something about their body to them, it makes any of the difficulties of any of what we do worth it, to have that. Because I remember that feeling myself. And so that's really the part of it that I missed, that education part of it and that connection part where somebody is brave enough to sit down and you created a space where they can share their story. And that that is the part of it that I missed and that had forgotten how much it makes your day even when it's a hard story, to be able to sit and hold space for someone else. So yeah, that connection.
Yeah, so true. Like this is why I struggle with social media because my entire career has been built around instant feedback loops, right? You educate, you say something to someone, whether I'm educating naturopathic doctors or whether I'm educating a patient, you say something to someone, you see the aha moment click in their head, and then everything about their reality changes moving forward.
Yeah.
It's like an instant identity shift. It's like the moment you have a child, right? You're like, I'm a mom. Like everything changes in that moment for a patient. It is the coolest thing to be a part of. Like truthfully, we haven't actually talked about this on here, which I'm surprised about because it is the coolest, most privileged thing, I think, part of our jobs. So when you're educating on social, when you're educating behind a screen, you don't see that, right? You don't get those loops. You don't get that feedback. And it's one of the things I find really challenging. I'm like, did this even land?
Did I make sense? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So one thing you and I have talked about quite a bit that I would love to talk about, it's going to be kind of a controversial subject. I'm known to not avoid those things, is navigating ND care in all of the potential for induction of eating disorders within our profession. As someone again, who has that eating disorder lens, you and I have talked about our personal experiences, right? I think it's a conversation that's really important to have because you can have education around food without driving it towards orthorexia. And I think I'm talking more about orthorexia than anorexia, but we've seen that happen too.
Yeah.
So, can you give me a bit of a rundown on how you approach that, how you're having those conversations? How do people know when they've crossed that line? Like, I think we're known for elimination diets. And
Yeah.
I don't practice that way. Our team does not practice that way. Some people need to cut gluten. Facts are facts. Some people do not feel good when they eat eggs or dairy in large amounts.
Mm.
Fine. But to go through and systematically eliminate 20 foods from someone's diet is not always the best solution. So give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I know that there's some shifts happening, and certainly as the research comes out and shows that actually those sort of restrictive diets are not necessarily helpful long term, and then there are psychological and physiological impacts to eliminating foods for, longer periods of time. There's definitely evidence and research that, yeah, sometimes people do need to cut out gluten, or maybe there's like a short-term reduction in certain types of foods and then we reintroduce them. So I think that is starting to shift. But certainly when I started in this profession 15 years ago, that was what we were known for. And I think there has been a bit of a reckoning personally as I've watched and worked with so many practitioners in the association role. I do think that there's been a shift and a reckoning that we have a responsibility to be able to have these conversations with patients around not promoting unhealthy eating beliefs and patterns, right? So I think that's one thing that I do see starting to shift, and I think there's still a lot of work to do. But for me, it's been a journey of, and I've done everything that you should or shouldn't do when it comes to food personally. And so I think there's a few pieces, both for like patients that are potential patients that might be listening or other NDs, right? Like, I think first of all, if there are signs that someone may be having an unhealthy thought process or obsession around certain types of foods, right away, I think having psychological support, whether it's a psychotherapist, CBT, EMDR, there's lots of different ways, but having that support outside of clinical visits, I think is necessary. And so that's something that we try to, make sure everybody, our practitioners know and that kind of thing. So that's one piece. But then just in general, it's an interesting conversation around, there's a sense, I think, in people with disordered eating that food freedom means you can eat whatever you want. And that's the balance, right? Where,
Oh,
yeah, where
it's like,
it's
oh,
like,
go in there today, everyone. Yeah.
yeah, this has been a struggle for me personally, going up and down in terms of this. And I always say, I'm very open about the fact that, if I don't continue to dialogue, get support or whatever, it's very easy for me to slip back into disordered eating behavior because it's a coping mechanism that worked for me,
Yeah.
in terms of that sort of way for a long time. So I'm very open about that. And so, I've had the experience where I went for some time, I did, and there were foods that didn't agree with me. And so having that conversation with patients is interesting because,
Yeah.
there are general guidelines, there are general principles. Pretty much everybody, I think, knows what they should do within variation, right? Like
Yeah.
people are generally pretty good at determining what's healthy and what's not healthy, but what is the balance for individuals? And this idea that food freedom, you know, I think it's really kind of, if I can say, bastardized on social media and
Yeah.
other things in a
Yeah.
sense where, you could eat whatever you wanted, but there's a consequence to that, to some of those
Yeah.
things. And we don't live in an environment where the food around us is health promoting. Sometimes I don't think it's a single conversation. I think it's a journey, especially again with people who might tend to have disordered eating conversations. It's never a one off. It's always a journey in terms of understanding what's happening in your body, maybe understanding
Mhm.
why some of these foods, a lot of, again, processed foods or whatever, might not be working for your physiology,
Yeah.
whether that's an individual with PCOS or endometriosis or just in general health. And, where are your boundaries and limits? And that can be look differently for everyone. And the bigger picture, I think, when we have a health condition that
Mhm.
really requires certain, I don't want to say it's not rules, but really certain principles around
Yeah.
food, is focusing on what's the goal. right? And where does that
Yeah.
freedom come from? And why do we think we need to eat these in order to feel in control or free? Like, so there's so much to unpack there. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big one for me. I think it's a difficult thing to address, but it's really important, that balance between, we don't want to have people in promoting restrictive eating patterns, but at the same time, what we eat has a tremendous impact on our health.
Yeah.
And balancing those two things it's part of the process.
It's such an important conversation to have within those patient visits. So I've actually not talked about this publicly very much, but for me, being obese the majority of my life, being on every diet known to man and having that not work, right?
Mhm.
And then developing celiac disease. Well, not developing, realizing I had celiac disease, pulling out gluten and dealing with the inflammatory ramifications of that, right? Because after you pull out a food that has caused that much inflammation, your body has lost oral tolerance completely. It
Mhm.
doesn't know what food is. It doesn't know what. So I was down to 10 foods at one point. And controlling those foods kept me out of pain. It kept me out of anxiety. It kept me out, like, it allowed me to have a degree of health that I had never experienced in my whole life. So I was afraid of foods because of how much they damaged my body for 20 years.
Yeah.
And so it's so interesting to like see from different perspectives how patterns of disordered eating can come in, because fundamentally I believe it's all about control, right?
Yeah, I
Even
agree.
with kids, it's not disordered. They're just little shits, right? And food is the one thing they can control. They're like, I can't control when I go to bed. I can't control when I wake up. I can't control if I go to school or not, but I can certainly control what I put in my freaking mouth.
Yeah.
But you see it start there
Mhm.
with it actually is a mechanism of control. And then you see it play out in so many different ways and shapes. And I think people oftentimes assume that disordered eating patterns and restriction is about controlling your body, but it can be your weight. When I say body, I mean
Yeah.
weight, right? But for me, it was about controlling my symptoms, right? It
Mhm.
was about never knowing what good felt like until I restricted those things.
Yeah.
And then reckoning with myself when I got healthy enough, when I had done the work on myself to add those things back and deal with the nervous system response of eating the food and then realizing I was okay, or eating the food, getting anxious, and then realizing the response was the anxiety, not the
Yeah, and
food
not the
itself.
food. Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I've watched this played out in some different perspectives over the last 10 years. So I work a lot with varsity athletes, primarily in group settings. So I've done a lot of like nutrition coaching. I teach sports nutrition and anatomy at the college here in North Bay. And I've done a lot of, yeah, mindset kind of work, nutrition work. So I see that population. I also have a 13-year-old daughter. And so, and it's interesting when you see that number of patients and people at different stages of life, primarily women. And there's interesting shifts happening in certain pockets of the population. So athletes in particular, my daughter, I mean, she was born at the naturopathic school. Like, you know, there seems to be a little bit more of an innate understanding as to the role that food actually plays in people's health. But I still think that it's a subset of most of us. And I talk to a lot of, I call them like the my doll generation, right? Like we're in our 40s,
Yeah.
50s, right? The peri-chaos or perimenopause. And we were not taught any of this. I mean, I still to this day, I've had two patients this week that are a similar age to me, mid 40s. And to explain to them what's actually happening with their menstrual cycles, even though now we're actually going to, well, it used to work like this, or it should have. Now we're
Yeah.
not. We just weren't taught. It just wasn't in the cultural lexicon about the impact that food had on our health. I think that is shifting for those of us that are sort of, as our clinic affectionately calls the itty bitty shitty committee, which I absolutely love. We have to address this idea that the food that we've been eating is
Mhm.
not the whole picture, but it's part of the picture of why our health and even if we think we're doing something that's healthy, oftentimes there's some misinformation there that's been kind of rooted in the culture around eating. So honestly, it's one of my favorite things to deal with in terms of I've seen, and we all have seen tremendous impact of diet changes, but then also, what does it look like? And this is a great time of year to talk about it because I have the same conversation with all of my patients at Christmas time. It's listen, the idea right now is we don't want to slide backwards. Maybe it's not going to be the best time to take a leap, but maybe for some of you it is, right? You have to figure out where you're at. But if you're going to indulge in something, my rules are, make it something you really want. Know if it's going to be something that's going to cause, maybe a flare up of this or that. Is it worth it? Have that conversation with yourself. Is there things we could do to potentially mitigate that? Sometimes it isn't. And then also giving them the permission to say no. And I also always say, if it's blame me. You have permission to blame me if it's something you don't want to eat or drink, if you're not in the space where you can put up that boundary yet. And I know that can be hard with some family members who've cooked, 12 dozen cookies, but people don't, there's just so much around food and culture, tradition, all of that tied into the choices that we make. And I guess to come full circle, that's the conversation that we have is like, why are you making the choices that you're making with the food that you put in your mouth? Is it habit?
Yeah.
Is it driven by something else? Is it health focused? Is it a control-based decision? And uncovering those layers from a clinical perspective. And of course, like I said, making sure that they're supported if they need to be in other areas it's a journey and it's part of it.
Absolutely. Today's episode is brought to you by none other than Advanced Women's Health. If you are interested in diving in deeper to your health, if you are finally ready to feel like yourself, and you are finally over hearing everything's normal, everything's fine, and you want a deeper dive into your healthcare, then we are here to help you. We are currently helping patients in British Columbia and Ontario, Canada. But don't worry, if you're in another province, still reach out, get added to the wait list as we expand coast to coast. We cannot wait to work with you. Check out the show notes for more information on how to get started. I struggled really hard with introducing the concept of weight loss resistance, right? Writing a whole book on weight loss resistance, even the title, you know what I mean? Like there's this balance between what's going to bring people in and the balance of what you want to give people. And I struggled with that a lot because I firmly believe that the most damaging thing you can do to someone is say calories in, calories out. Like I will push the boundaries on marketing, right? To allow someone to understand that it is not a calories in, calories out conversation, that hormones have a massive impact on the body, on how everything works together. But I think so much damage is done by that statement. If you just restrict more, you will be okay, right? And in the PCOS, so similar to you, I had a patient in this week and she wants to get pregnant and she has PCOS. And she said, and she had the best CGM I had ever seen, continuous glucose monitor, best I'd ever seen in my whole life. 2 spikes in 2 weeks, like perfect. And I said, what are you eating? And she's like, I eat FI, like the food insulin demand principles to a T, because every single time I go to eat crap, she called it, I tell myself I won't get pregnant. And I was like, okay, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm like, it's a fine balance. Like I understand that theory. And the reality is that if you eat a lot of high insulin demand foods on a consistent basis, then it can have an impact on your fertility. That is facts. That is true to acknowledge and recognize. And I love that you're doing that. And you can have something with your family on the holidays, and that's not going to mean that you don't get pregnant, right? If you, and I did the exact same thing, right? Like very much alike. You could tell we all talk to each other all day, but I was like, don't eat crap because it's in front of you. Pick your favorite dessert, buy it for your damn self and bring it to the potluck, right?
Have what you want.
Bring what you want. Enjoy it in a way you want to. And if you don't get your period, it's not the cause, right?
Yeah.
But the other piece, especially when we're dealing with the weight loss resistance cycle, the insulin resistance cycle, the hormonal impacts of food that prevent you from losing weight in the face of very healthy, normal interventions, the food noise can get so real. And one deviation from your plan can jack your insulin such that the food noise gets so much worse.
Yeah.
So that's something I think that's really important to talk about, is that kind of food noise that's coming up for a lot of people, especially during the holidays or after they indulge. Like, how do you walk through that with people?
You should run out of product. And food for food noise, you mean like externally or in terms of like when you have a jacked insulin and then
Both.
yeah, both. Yeah.
Honestly, I think both come into
Because there's
play,
two,
right?
right? Yeah.
There's the
Yeah.
external food noise of our environment. Like, I used to do research and we
Mhm.
used to put ingredients in cheese and see which one people ate most of. Like,
Yeah.
the fact that I used to do that, I'm like,
It's
now I
crazy.
understand what that whole study was about and why it was sponsored by Nestle, right? But there's the external food noise, but then
Right.
there's the internal
The
food noise
internal.
within your
Yeah.
brain. Yeah.
I think, first of all, there's an internal and predatory environment when it comes to diet. And I use that term very specifically. So when you were talking about like marketing and that kind of thing, I think that, I think I've seen it done with integrity. And I think that we do a good job of that here. I may be biased, but but I've also seen it done in ways that are
Appreciate it.
quite frankly unethical. I have this conversation with my strength and conditioning coaches because I teach them nutrition, but very much within the scope of practice of the profession. I try to teach them, hey, these are when you need to refer because I've seen so much damage happen. Recommendations where you don't have the full picture. So for me, with our patients, like one of the things I love about the advanced women's health approach is that we have information, we have data. And so the noise, we can show them this is what's happening. And this is what's going to happen if you have one thing over the holidays that's going to spike your
Yeah.
insulin versus if you did it every day. Or, and so that to me
It's a
cuts
meal,
through
not a
the
season.
noise.
This
Yeah.
is what I always say.
Yes, right? It's a meal, not a it cuts through the noise because the noise comes from the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that we're hearing, and and the guessing what might happen, right? And I think that's the advantage of having concrete information to show people. I have lots of conversations with lots of different types of practitioners, and some practitioners are like, oh, people overtest or whatever. I mean, I think that can happen, but to really this is a great demonstration of the value of having a number, of having an insulin curve where we can actually look at you or a CGM like you mentioned, where it's like we can actually, and then that I think almost eliminates the noise because we're not guessing. We're not relying on the stories that we hear or the stories that we're telling ourselves to try and figure out what's going to happen. We know. And then we can make informed decisions about what am I going to eat, right? And I think that when you talked about control earlier, I think that disordered eating behavior is a coping mechanism as a way to, that's certainly how it developed in my life. And I think a lot of people, it's something that you can control. I can control what I'm putting in my mouth when everything around me is not in control. But there is a sense of control on the other side. There can be a healthy sense of control when you know and understand what's happening in your body.
And again, I think rounding out that story, I trust so I don't have to control, right? Like coming on to the other side of it,
That's the next
having the
step, right? Yeah.
exactly, like having the data I have about my body now, doing my blood work every year, knowing if I've deviated or not, because I am genetically insulin resistant. Everyone in my family is insulin resistant. Type 2 diabetes wreaks havoc, right? I'm genetically insulin resistant. So having these like bumpers, like when you're bowling, right? That my body kind of goes down and I'm like, oh, I'm tired. I don't feel great after a meal. I'm outside of my bumpers, right? To have that, I trust that I will get those symptoms and I will know how to deviate and modify, and then my body will respond. This is the key. And then my body will respond. I trust that if I eat eggs, so eggs is actually something I became sensitive to after the birth of my first kiddo. I was fine before that. If I eat eggs, I will rebound. I will be okay. I will be not feeling great for a hot minute, right? But I will be okay. It's not like you get that trigger and you can't trust the next time you're going to feel like yourself again. For so many of our patients, they have not felt well enough long enough, whether that is pain, whether that is mental emotional symptoms or energy, whether is that their weight, they don't have confidence in their body. So they externally apply a locus of control, and then they use food to try to control here. And it
Yes.
becomes, this is why I love psychology, right? Because it comes a cluster. Like,
Yeah.
and so much of what I have not moved my practice into, but incorporated into my practice in the last few years is that lens, right?
Yeah.
It's, I can have the best treatments in the world, and I think I do. No joke. But if you don't address the other components that are in the room with you, it's not going to be sustainable, or it's going to feel restrictive,
Right.
or they're not going to do it.
And that's really interesting because it's something that I didn't mention in the beginning, but I think I'd been in practice for about 3 or 4 years, and which is probably about the time you were graduating, okay? But I was still kinda green, but I remember leaving practice and thinking, like, "I'm gonna change so many lives. I've seen the miracle of what happens when someone changes their diet and starts to sleep and understands their body," and I was very. And then 3 or 4 years into practice, you're like, you get hit very strongly with the fact that changing human behavior is the hardest thing
Yep.
in the world, and even short-term changes and then sustaining that. And there was a lot that I discovered. So with female patients in particular, like even just like menstrual cycle timing of when we started things and for them to understand and expect when they might not feel as motive like
Yeah.
that was a whole conversation. But I really started to dive into that sort of change psychology. And I ended up during COVID, I did my master's in social neuroendocrinology. Oh,
Yeah.
I actually haven't defended yet, but so I'm technically still pending. But I finished the whole project and we published a paper. But that was the idea behind it was like looking at how hormones impact people's behavior. And what I studied was actually called competitive will. So what drives someone to accomplish a task versus someone who doesn't? Like what would make someone experience pain in order to win or accomplish their goal? So anyway, so that part of it to me is something that you can't, but I think it's really difficult to make impactful dietary recommendations without
Yeah.
looking at the picture of that and how meeting people where they're at, what does sustainable change look like, and really having those conversations. And I think, the long-term goal is exactly what you said. When people start to understand their bodies, they are
Mm.
able to, over time, with support, let go of the need to control everything and understand that our bodies, you know, will respond in a certain
Yeah.
way. And once we understand and know what that is, and we understand the container with which our individual genetics and our individual upbringing operates,
Yeah.
that's power.
Yeah.
That's health, and it's not about always feeling great.
Yeah.
It's about understanding, you know, how the choices that you make impact things, the exposures that you have, whether that's environmental, social, emotional, etc., right? And learning how to cope with those and empowering, ourselves to be able to better choices sometimes, or sometimes to make a choice and know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
And so that body trust, that was something that I never ever understood or experienced until I started to work as an ND myself. And some days I have it and some days I don't. It's part of the
Absolutely. Yeah.
journey, right? So that's really what I think all of us really want for ourselves and our patients, right? Is to really just understand the body that you were gifted and how to take care of it. And then to trust that it's going to do what it needs to do. I think that's why we became NDs, because we innately kind of know that, right? Yeah. When the pieces are in place, our bodies will take care of us if we take care of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's why for me, at the time this comes out, right, we will be in our second reset, quote unquote,
Mhm.
with the app, which is focused on behavior change at its
Mhm.
core, looking at your identity, looking at what's holding you back, looking at some of those core fundamental principles of what prevents deeper levels of change,
Yeah.
right? And then we're getting into creating more coaching containers and more group coaching containers, because the only thing more powerful than having accountability to a coach or an ND is having accountability to a group.
Yeah.
And having a group where no one's shaming you, no one's putting you down. Everyone wants to see your best potential. And like we have people in the group already, they're going for walks together, they're holding themselves accountable together. Like this is health in
Yeah.
2025 for women. Like this, you know what I mean? This is how it has to be
It
from
has to
now
be.
on.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Like that 3 years in practice mark, for me, it was probably a little sooner, but I was also slammed. Like I had 30 to 35 patient facing hours a week, fully booked from the time I was 6 months in practice, right?
That's
Like
amazing.
my
Yeah.
learning curve was
Steep.
she was steep. And
Yeah.
but you hit that point where you're like, nothing else matters. You know what I mean? Like, and again, I love research. So people are listening on the other side of this are like, what is she talking about? But I love research, but I have so much confidence in the plans that we execute that to me now it's holding that space for patients and their experience.
Yeah.
But it's also when you are brand new into practice, you don't know how to do this. And like our team, we have open conversations about this every day in clinical rounds.
Yeah.
People are like, can I just like sit and watch how you got from here to here to here to here to here?
Yeah.
Right. Because it is this like navigating of psychology, and you
Yeah.
meet the patient where they're at and you challenge them, and then it goes well and you go further, and then it goes well and it doesn't, and then you say, oh, why didn't that go well? And then you go right. Like it's this
Yeah.
whole dance of getting a person to a protocol that feels efficacious, that they believe in, that they trust that they can do, that they trust they can get a result from. And it's like navigating all of those things. That's what good medicine is. And
Yeah.
I think that's why fundamentally I am as good as you guys are at medicine, right? Like we spend all of our time together.
Yeah.
It's the reality is any single one of you could do that initial protocol very similar to how I would do it. I tell patients this all the time. Like you have been through the trenches to get to work at Advanced Women's Health. Like you've been through the courses, you have your own experiences. What the reason why people want me and not someone else is because deep down, the way their friend described their experience with me as a doctor, they know that's what they need.
Yeah.
And they like trust that because I psychoanalyzed one of their other friends, I'll do the same for them. But it is something that I think you can learn. It's just you have to learn it through being burnt over and over and over again and seeing what worked and what didn't work, or watching someone do it, right? So even internally for us, that's going to be a big part of training is I'm going to bring practitioners on calls with me to help me facilitate, but also watch me ninja, right? Like I can get double swimming lessons in Kingston and
it's there's a few things there that I think really key into the difference of what Advanced Women's Health is trying to accomplish. Like I think not only do we have these communities of, again, primarily women, but that are working together. And I actually believe that, one-on-one care and individualized care is incredibly important, but real change in health happens in groups of women. I've seen it in my career over and over again.
Absolutely.
That's also our clinic, right? Like we are a community of women who work together and support each other. And those two things are, I can't even explain to you like what a privilege it is to see two communities grow and work together and how powerful they are, so that piece of it. And then, the learning and the patient experience, like, and those things they do come from experience, if having been in practice and you see and you talk to, hundreds and hundreds of patients, you start to really see that there are some common patterns in how we think and behave, belief systems we have that are standing in our way and that kind of thing. But as a team, we also help each other work through some of those tough conversations and that. And, even just, I think, earlier this week, we were on a call and I said, I have a patient and looking for some insights on like, we know this is what, and they know this is what they need to do, but how do we approach this conversation in a way that's safe and effective and meets them where they're at, but also challenges them to do what we know they need to do. There's a reason that you're coming to see us, you know, kind of owning that as well. So yeah.
Yeah. And it's so funny. Like, people ask me all the time about advanced women's health and how we created the community model and how we did all these things. And like, quite literally, it was because Michaela and I were working during the pandemic and wanted to see each other. So we started having calls once a week. And then Michelle came on, right? And then Michelle was like, okay, well, what can we also meet one other day? Because I feel like we have more questions. And I was like, okay. And then we had 3 more NDs come on. And then we were like, okay, well, I guess we need to meet every day now. It was so organic and
Mhm.
so based on what each of us wanted. Like, I always say, like, I'm very fortunate. I have created my ideal world in my patient practice, in how the clinic runs, and other people want to be a part of it. And I
Yeah.
think that's where now we have a big enough team that we can do that within the context of, like, we're going to be doing group onboardings for patients where it's like
Mhm.
you come into the clinic and you're immediately offered a group,
Yeah.
right? It's just like part of the process.
Mhm.
And now we are at a size where we can facilitate that,
Yeah.
where we can make that happen. And that to me is just, it's how medicine needs to change, right? And I don't have faith it will happen. And so I am making that happen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we all know pressure comes from innovation at the top.
Yeah.
And so if I start doing it, other people will look around and say, okay, well, we have to make a choice. We have to lose all our patients to advance women's health or be better.
Well,
Make your own damn choices,
yeah.
everyone. But
Make good choice.
it's right. And not everyone wants individual, like, patient or group care. I get that. That's totally fine. But I think I just want our profession and all professions in medicine to stretch a little bit right
Yeah.
now in terms of what they think women need.
Yeah, and there's a couple interesting things there too, and just in terms of, you know, different roles that I have within the profession. I think that group programs, well, I think, or any sort of group sort of environment like that, there's just this innate benefit that we've already described. But also, you know, I hear a lot about people talking about naturopathic medicine being expensive, inaccessible. You know, we live in a world where there's quote unquote free
Absolutely.
public health care that's not free.
Absolutely.
You know, and so these are challenging conversations and things for our profession and other professions
Yeah.
to navigate. And so for me, the fact that we have that is so valuable to me from just even a business and clinical perspective, because it allows me to say, you know what, if you can't see me one-on-one, you know, we charge what we charge for reasons. It's expensive to be a naturopathic doctor in Ontario, and with insurance and fees and everything else. Like, we do our best to keep costs reasonable. But if that's not an option for you right now, there are other ways to access this medicine and these ideas and this healing. And that's important to me. And I think it's a model that our profession needs to look at more often, right? Where it's like there's other ways to do this that are just as
Absolutely.
impactful and beneficial. And also, again, just the bigger picture that our healthcare, use that term loosely, system, you know, operates in silos, and it operates in these sort of like individualized lanes. And it doesn't work because our
Yeah.
systems and our bodies silos. And
Yeah.
so, you know, for us to be able to work together intercollaboratively with other professionals and to
Yeah.
sort of be leading that innovative kind of way of looking at it. And there, you know, there's a few clinics that are doing different versions of it, and I think it needs, you know, paving the way really to do that,
Absolutely.
and that's where healthcare needs to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, we could go on forever about this. I feel like we've just absolutely crossed all the important topics. So I love this. But to wrap up,
Mhm.
out of all of the pieces we've chatted through and the ones we haven't, what do you think is the most important thing for women's health in 2025 that you want to see happen, that you feel like needs to have happen to genuinely support someone?
You know, it may not sound like something new, but I think it's starting to come forward. As I have gotten into my 40s, I have started to say that I'm in my, like, I don't give a phase of life, right?
Your effort
Um,
phase. Yeah.
yeah, and I think, you know, I'd love to see women younger and younger being able to
Yeah.
do that. But I think there's like an unapologetic revolution that kind of needs to happen, where I just have experienced myself and see so many women who are trying to do it all
Yeah.
and have lost that sense of who they are and what's important. And they don't even, so many women I talk to don't remember the last time they went to the bathroom on their own, you know?
Yeah.
And so sort of that, and even those that may not have families, I very rarely talk to a woman who is not in some aspect of her life a high achiever, who's
Yep.
doing, and I
Overcommitted.
overcommitted, absolutely, kind of feeling exhausted and really not taking care of themselves in a restorative way. And so there's a lot of pieces around that we could dive into, but I think that
That'll be podcast 2,
that's a big
everyone who's just
podcast.
like, let's talk about this.
Let's talk about
Let's
that.
just stick here for an hour and a half and grab a glass of wine and just shoot the shit,
Let's
Tracy.
have that conversation. I think that there is an ownership to our health that we need to step into. And that's hard. It's about boundaries, right? It's about, listen, we're here. We're here for you. We have 20 doctors that have, worked together to, like you said, trust our protocols and our process. But it's that idea of stepping into really saying, yeah, you know what, I'm going to make this much of myself a priority this year, and doing some of that work and getting the support, because you can't do it alone. I mean, I have my own ND. Like, I don't do this stuff on my own.
Yeah. I would say you can't use your superpower on yourself, right? I don't even try. Yep.
Well, exactly. No. And my whole family sees different NDs, or they wouldn't listen to me anyways. But yeah, so I think I'm not even sure how to sum that up. But really, to me, the tools are here. There's a lot, like you said, there's a lot of noise online there, but there are resources like our clinic, and there are others, but that's what we're talking about, that are here to support people. We're so lucky that we have apps and we have groups and we have all these different ways. So I think that's the thing. I would like to see women who are listening to this take a step in the direction of self, care, whatever that looks like to them, in a real concrete way. Keep listening to the podcast, make a phone call, book an appointment, see what group programs are out there, whether it's with Advanced Women's Health in your community, wherever. But don't wait another year of, taking that little bit of time back, because, we all hear it. We all hear you have to take care of yourself to take care of others. But I experienced it in the not so recent past, where wasn't doing that and really did experience that sort of burnout. And I see it all around. So that's the revolution. I think the revolution of taking care of ourselves as we take care of each other is, the rest of it is we put it together, we get the data, we do the work, right?
And I think this is when we talk about take care of yourself to take care of other people. And I think this is a really important note to end on. What immediately goes into most people's mind is, if I take care of myself, I give it all to my kids. If I take care of myself, I can then give more to my parents, my friends who need me, etc. But we can, in community, take care of ourselves to take care of each other. And model that very generous giving and taking, not being depleted by an interaction. I joke, I'm like, I don't have that many friends, but it's because the people that are around me don't deplete me. I don't need to fill my cup to pour it out into them. I fill my cup to fill theirs, and then we all overflow. And I think that's the power of community, right? And you've got a little bit extra and you balance them out and they balance you out and everyone grows. It's I think about health in business terms a lot, and they always say the only point of making money is to use that money to grow more, right? And the point of getting more energy, getting more health, getting more hormonal balance is not to just spend it on a Birkin. It's, well, in my mind, if you want to do that, rock on. But to me, it's you make it to reinvest it, because when you reinvest that energy, you get 3 times the dividends, right? You get, for every amount you reinvest into yourself and the people around you, you should get 3, 5 times the return. And it's so possible.
Yeah. I think that there is this, It's probably control, social media, all kinds of things. But there's this idea, we're supposed to be able to do all of this on our own, and you can't. I laugh at the memes right now about having to quit your job to get your protein in or whatever. And it's like, that's not what we're creating here.
The one girl at work who gets her protein in, have you seen that one? And she's like, getting my protein. I'm shaking my water bottle for those who can't. It's like the funny. She's like, "Did you get your protein?" Oh my god, that one kills me. I like cry every time I see it.
But we laugh because that's what it feels. It feels overwhelming, and we were not meant to do all of these things on our own or in silos. And I think that's that's that piece. It's not about losing the weight or going to see doing this or whatever this year. It's actually about just sort of stepping into circles and communities where you can support each other and start on that health journey in a way that is supported, actually attainable, and that's what we created here. And that's why I love it so much.
Amazing. Well, we could go on forever, but we will do part 2 of this for sure. We'll get a few more people in too and have this conversation because I think it's a really important one to have. But thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. There are going to be so many people who pull so many aha moments from this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you had as much fun as we did. And if you loved today's episode, share it with a friend and leave us a review. That is how we spread this message, and that is how we are going to revolutionize healthcare in Canada for women. Have a beautiful day and be well.